What questions do you have about any of the different expressions of Islam? Anything we need to clarify? The major practice most noted in Islam is known as the 5 pillars. There is a tradition that Muhammad claimed that Islam is built on 5 pillars, and we'll look at the quote here in a little bit. These are the foundation for Islam as a religion, but there is also a social responsibility that is a part of this as well. Additionally, it is not just the outward practice of them that is emphasized, but the inward direction that is also important as well, as you would see in other types of religions. Empty acts are not considered valuable. The first of the 5 pillars is the Shahada, the bearing of witness. You don't necessarily need to get the Arabic names, but more the English. Essentially, the statement that there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Right? And so this claim, this affirmation of the oneness of God, the primacy of Muhammad as the prophet of God, one converts into Islam by repeating the Shahada. Now, there is this kind of claim that you could repeat it and that's enough. But usually it's encouraged that you do that before 2 Muslim witnesses, right? And so that they can kind of verify, yes, this person has said that they believe there is one God and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Usually at birth, the Shahada is the first thing whispered into the child's ear, right? And so you're kind of starting them off early in Islam. The calligraphy here is an expression of the Shahada in Arabic. The second pillar is that of Salat, or prayer. These are prayers that are expected to be performed. They are obligatory. Voluntary prayer is encouraged as well, so it's kind of encouraged that you pray in addition to this. But prayers are expected to be performed 5 times daily. You can find a wide variety of how the timing is referred to, but essentially the 5 are dawn, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, and after dark. There are some differences among Shia Shia Muslims. See, even I fall prey to calling them Islams. Among Shiites, they will sometimes combine the midday and afternoon prayers and the evening and night prayers and say 3 prayers daily. There is this kind of prophetic tradition that could be done. That was an exception that could be made, that this was accepted. Usually it's just done if somebody's on travel, where you don't have the ability to stop as often. But the 5 are what are done by most Muslims. It is to be done facing Mecca, and it involves a cycle of bowing, kneeling, and prostration. All right? And so it's not just what's being said or thought and what's being said, but it's also the bodily movement as well. And this is done at certain times in certain ways. Right? It's a fixed cycle. Largely from passages from the Quran, one of which is the following: Praise be to God, the Lord of the worlds, the compassionate, the merciful, master of the day of judgment. Only you do we worship, and only you do we implore for help. Lead us to the right path, the path of those you have favored, not those who have incurred your wrath or have gone astray. Right? So it's not just prayer and making up prayer on your own. It is the recitation of specific prayers. The call to prayer appears at a variety of times in Muslim-majority countries, usually over loudspeakers, but in more recent times, of course, on television, internet, this call to stop whatever it is you're doing and engage in prayer. And as we mentioned, when we were talking about this last Thursday. There are a lot of people, cultural Muslims, don't follow this, right? So they don't stop during the day. But the expectation is that this is something that you will engage in. The third pillar is that of zakat, or almsgiving. Once a year, during the month of Ramadan, you are to give 2.5% of everything. It used to be put in a communal treasury, right? In previous times, in Muslim-controlled lands, there would be this kind of communal treasury that would be used for widows, orphans, the poor. Today it is much more voluntary, especially Muslims in the West. There's very little centralization of any sort. Many people will give it to their mosque. Others might give it to an Islamic charity. But here is meant to be this kind of social justice approach of helping out those that don't have. The fourth pillar is that of fasting during Ramadan. Ramadan, of course, a month in the Islamic calendar. It is believed that that is the month in which Gabriel appeared to Muhammad to begin revealing what became the Quran. From sunrise to sunset, every day of the month of Ramadan, you are to fast. You abstain from food, abstain from drink, even abstain from things like sex or smoking or other things like that. Now, there are some exceptions. Small children, the elderly, the sick, nursing children, nursing mothers. So there are some, exceptions. If there's a health reason, you can be exempted from it. In many cases, people will gather prior to sunrise and have a meal to get you through the day, and after sunset, a larger meal, right, to kind of make up for what you didn't get during the day. Now, the Islamic calendar, as we've mentioned, is lunar, and so it rotates throughout the Western calendar. And so, in the summer, you have a lot longer time that you're fasting, and in the winter, it's shorter. And this puts, of course, some Muslims in a very difficult position. A couple of years ago, Ramadan fell during the Olympics. And so a lot of Muslim athletes were in the position of, well, what do we do? Because we need our energy to participate in these athletic events. Some imams suggested that in such a case, because they were as Muslims from Muslim countries, they could break the fast. That would be an exception that would be allowed. But other Muslims, very committed to this, decided, I'm going to follow it, even though that might affect my performance. So, sometimes that does put Muslims in a difficult position. The fifth and final pillar is that of the Hajj, or a pilgrimage. It is expected that at least once in your life, you will go to Mecca as a Muslim and participate in this particular pilgrimage. Now, here too are, of course, exceptions. If you're not physically able to go throughout the pilgrimage, right, because it is a rather trying ordeal, so some people wouldn't physically be able to do it. If you're not financially able to get to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, you might you would be exempt as well. There are parts of the pilgrimage that you could do throughout the year. You could do a smaller pilgrimage called the Umrah, which involves a few things. But in general, the pilgrimage season, where most of this takes place, the full Hajj, occurs in the 12th month on the 8th day. And so, it's at a specific time that most people arrive. This is when the Hajj takes place. The Hajj follows a prescribed route Right? There are specific places you go and specific events that you partake in. So it starts off with arrival outside the city, changing into white garments. Right? So that's why you see so much white in some of these shots of the crowd. The idea behind the white is to both put everybody on the same plane, because you're all dressed the same, but it's also reminiscent of Muslim burial clothes. So in a sense, by going on the Hajj, you're kind of dying yourself and then being reborn at the end of the Hajj. After making the change, the pilgrims descend on the city of Mecca and start at the Great Mosque in Mecca, where they will circle the Kaaba 7 times. Right? The Kaaba can hold up to 3 million people now. I don't know if there's exactly 3 million people in that shot, right? But it's been expanded over the centuries. And so, what's in the base of the Kaaba, there is this black stone. There are claims that it was found by Abraham and put there. Some people suggest it might be a piece of a meteorite. It's exactly unclear where it came from. But that's kind of the marker that you use for how many times you've gone around. It used to be, when it was a lot smaller, a lot fewer Muslims, that you would try to touch the stone as, that's 1, that's 2. Well, obviously these people out here are not getting to that stone. So it's like, there it is, that's 1. There it is, that's 2. Right, so you circle that around 7 times and then leave Mecca and head towards the city of Mina, or the plains to Mina. There's a stop there, and then making your way out to the plains of Arafat, which is what's pictured here. This is the plains of Arafat. The plains of the Arafat Valley are about 12 miles from the city of Mecca. It's believed that Muhammad gave his last speech before his death there, and that's why it's an important place. It's also, the claim is that Adam and Eve were created there. And of course, the Bible says, of course, the rivers of the Euphrates and Tigris, they're putting it more in Iraq. But again, another Muslim divergence from the biblical tradition. And they were taught that humans were created solely for the worship of God. Involved in the plains of Arafat is a sacrifice. There's ritual sacrifice of animals, and that food will be given to the needy. The next day, the trip is kind of reversed. As you make your way back, at Mina, there are 3 stone pillars. And at this point, people will have been gathering stones as they have walked towards the pillars, and then will throw the stones at the pillars. It's believed, again, there's a slight divergence here from the biblical tradition, that God called Abraham to sacrifice Ishmael, not Isaac. And so as he was called upon to do this, the devil appeared to Abraham and tempted him to ignore God's command. And Abraham supposedly picked up stones and threw them at the devil. So this recreation, this stoning of the devil, except you're throwing it at these pillars, representing him. Many people will also shave their heads at this point. The return trip to Mecca, circling again the Kaaba, and then going out and drinking from a sacred spring that is nearby, believed to be connected to Hagar and Ishmael. The biblical tradition, of course, is Hagar being cast out and God providing water there, but there's not exactly the same kind of tradition. Very important pilgrimage, right? Lots of ritualistic activity involved in connecting yourself to biblical stories, connecting yourself to places where Muhammad was, right? Connecting yourself to the rest of the Muslim community as you're going with all of these people in the equal plane. But it's also a very dangerous activity. And there have been a wide variety of dangers experienced by pilgrims at various times. Even in the most recent pilgrimage season, there was several people that died on the pilgrimage. There have been stampedes, right? And so people getting trampled under stampede. As you might expect, people getting hit by rocks with, millions of people, or a million, several hundred thousand people throwing rocks. Somebody's going to get hit. They don't all hit the pillars. There have been cases where people have been cooking in the tents at Arafat and have lit their tent on fire and died from the smoke or died from the fire. All right, and so there have been all. And so the country of Saudi Arabia has done a variety of things to try and prevent this from happening. And so in the plains of Arafat, they provide inflammable tents now, but they also provide prepackaged meals. Right? So you're not needing to cook meals. With the stoning, well, there's only so much you can do when you're throwing stone. But what they've done is kind of created this like 3-tier expressway to get more and more people through and try to spread people out in that way. And so they're constantly trying to figure out how to adjust things that can be adjusted to try and bring about safety. But as I mentioned, even in the most recent pilgrimage season, there were some people that died from the activities. Questions about either the 5 pillars of the Hajj?
Who leads the pilgrimage?
I'm not specifically sure. You would expect there would be somebody that's kind of guiding that. I don't know if it may be some of the imams in Mecca. I'm not sure. I'll have to look that one up.
In the Shahada, why is it just Muhammad? Because they talk about like Abraham and Moses and Jesus. Why is it Muhammad?
Well, Muhammad is considered to be like the culmination of the prophets, right? And so there's a specialness about Muhammad, especially as distinguishing Islam from Christianity and Judaism, because Muhammad is the one that would be different between that. And so emphasizing the messenger, the message of Muhammad is part of that. Although they would say in other things, of course, that, like we said before, all those people are prophets and they recognize them as prophets. Other questions?